Hey, uh, I wanted to bring up some Zelda stuff, some Zelda Ocarina of Time stuff, um, focusing some more on the childhood portion of the game. There were several things about the first three dungeons that I noticed, and okay, so yeah, here they are. The thing is that it feels as if in the first area of the game, the Deku Tree area, there is this sort of situation with Saria where it feels as if she likes you, um, and it feels as if it could have been like a budding relationship or something, or it feels as if maybe they were childhood friends that who were very close. There was some sort of a link between them, and then Link runs away. He doesn't run away, but he literally runs away. He literally runs off and says goodbye. So there's a separation. There was some sort of a sense of them liking each other, or of Saria liking him, and then it's separated. And that's how the game starts, the childhood portion starts. And then the childhood portion ends with the opposite dynamic, which is two people who had no kind of relationship, Ruto and Link. Ruto doesn't really like Link. She doesn't seem to be very interested in him. And then something kind of emerges between them. She ends up liking him, and like a relationship emerges between them, which is represented by the jewel, which is like a marriage symbol. So they unite. So the childhood portion seems to be fronted and backed by first a relationship between Link and a girl, a relationship that is separated, and then it ends with a relationship between Link and a girl that starts off separate and then unites. So that's that. I thought that was interesting, and I thought it's interesting that then Death Mountain, the central section, has no kind of love interest story of this kind. It has no sort of like romantic tale, as those two other sections seem to have or seem to imply. The Saria one is more implied, but you get the general sense of it, I think. So then Death Mountain doesn't seem to have that. And instead, if we were to think of it as, does Link meet like a girl in each section, then you could say, well, in Death Mountain, Link meets the Great Fairy, which is like, so the difference here, I think, is that the Great Fairy is an adult woman and not a girl, and she is clearly sort of idolized, I would say, by Link, by the game, by the camera. There is much more of an idealization going on at many levels. First of all, it's all much more sexual in nature, like there is a sense, like, for example, the camera. I thought this is funny, that the actual camera in the game pans across her, clearly sort of focusing on her body in the way that pornography would, or something. And then there are these other sort of ways that the camera sometimes positions itself, which make it seem as if Link is like staring directly at her genitals or something. there is also the way in which, like, she is placed above Link, floating in the sky. So there is a constantly a relationship of looking up at something that's slightly like unattainable and awe-inspiring and sort of above you. Anyway, there are several things like this that make it seem as if what we're dealing with here is more of a sort of sexual fantasy or idealization. Okay, so I thought that was interesting, those 3 stages. But then the other thing is that the dungeons sort of echo something about this. Because the first dungeon, the Deku Tree, is all about death. It's all about the Deku Tree dying. So, in some ways, sinking down into the earth, right? Dying, crumbling, becoming this sort of grey husk that then you would imagine would just crumble away and sink down, right, into the earth as ash or whatever. So there is death, which is what happens to Saria and Link. There was some sort of a relationship between them, and it dies. There's a death, there's a separation. Jabu Jabu is almost the opposite. There was something under the ground, under the water. Jabu Jabu is clearly a creature who lives underground, in the water, in the depths of the water. But Jabu Jabu has risen up to the surface to greet the living, so to speak. And the living can then interact with Jabu Jabu, enter Jabu Jabu, relate to Jabu Jabu. So Jabu Jabu was down in the depths, was dead in some way, in the land of death, and has risen. So something has gone from death to life, has risen up, which is what happens with Ruto. Again, there was some sort of relationship that was non-existent. There was nothing there. It was dead, and then it becomes alive. It is animated. The relationship is reanimated or something. So there is this sort of thing where the relationships that Link has with significant others, right? Who this game is always presenting as being women, right? So these sorts of relationships, as an aside, it's interesting because I hadn't realized how much this game is about this. Like, watching it through again, it's almost like there's a harem quality to this, in that, or there's this sense that Link, wherever he goes, whichever town or area of the world he goes, he will find a woman who he develops some sort of a relationship or crush on. And so I get the sense that sexual or romantic relationships, or at least the relationship between men and women, is at the forefront of the game in some way. And I think this becomes important later, because Zelda then presents herself as a man, as Sheik. So there is some sort of gender issue going on, I think, in this game. And I say presents herself because that's obviously one of the mysteries of the game, but I feel as if what the game is saying is that what the game is trying to say, let's say the status quo Nintendo side of things that wants the game to be family friendly in the sense of being hegemonic in its presentations of sexuality and gender orientation. I think that part of Nintendo, what it's trying to say is, no, Zelda remains Zelda, and Sheik is a disguise. Okay, but the role that this disguise has, I think, in the game is very interesting when you realize how much it feels to me that the game is about gender. The gender of being a man, the gender of being a woman, and what that means and the implications of that and things like that, and the social roles of that. Because a lot of this does seem to be Link having this sort of wide variety of objects of desire or sexual interests or romantic interests around his adventures. I get the sense, at least, that that's sort of happening here. And that maybe the intention is that this would be appealing to the player, to the male heterosexual player, would be, you know, you get to explore this world and, you know, fall in love with all these different people. And then you can kind of, as a player, you can pick. It feels like the same kind of thing that visual novels do, you know, those sorts of like romantic sexual visual novels where the player protagonist has conversations or dates with a whole series of different women, and then depending on the player's personal sort of attraction, they will create their own little stories or fantasies in one direction or another. Okay, anyway, this is really irrelevant at the moment. I don't think this is important now, but I feel like that's happening in this game, so whatever. So the dungeons seem to go in that direction. The first dungeon is death. The last dungeon is life. It's the birth of a relationship. The first dungeon is the death of a relationship. The middle dungeon is death. It's Death Mountain. So it's not the process of going from life to death or the process of going from death to life. It is the process of being in death, in the sort of eternal zone of death. But then what happens is, what you encounter in this underworld place is that the Dodongo beast, at least, you know, the face that you walk into is a skull. But it becomes alive. Its eyes shine up in red flames and its mouth opens. So it's mimicking life. It's mimicking eyes ablaze. It's mimicking mouth opening. So it's a skull. It's dead, but it's alive at the same time. I think that this realm of the underworld is similar to it's the underworld in the sense that it's beyond life and death or something. It's neither of life nor of death. It's not about any specific living beings. I think that's why it's about archetypes. And I think that's why the Great Fairy is an archetype. And that's what Link is encountering in this mountain, is like some sort of, you know, the sort of idealized woman from like the eyes of the game and of Link. So I think that's interesting. In the first two sections, what we encounter is real people. There's real people, and therefore there are real relationships and real changes in those relationships. That sometimes they grow closer, sometimes they grow apart. You know, time changes them. But then in Death Mountain, there is this sort of an eternal relationship with the archetypes. because it's not a real person. It's not a real human being. Let's say the Great Fairy is closer to some sort of a divine figure. It seems like an eternal figure. It seems as if she could sort of live eternally in that place and assist. She seems to be the kind of character who has lived for millions of eons or something like that. Okay. So what do we make of this? Is this in any way something that's going on? Is there like a way in which there are these two first and last areas of the game, and then the middle section is this encounter with Death Mountain, and therefore the things that are not alive, so the archetypes. And so Link is encountering, in this case, not a relationship with a real person, but the archetype of the gender role known as woman or something, right? From the eyes of Link. One thing that I feel may contrast with this is that the other thing that Link encounters in Death Mountain are the Gorons. And the Gorons are, if I were to think of them in terms of the gender roles and archetypes and things like that, they're very good contenders to what would culturally be associated to masculine archetypes, because they are like strong and muscular and, right, all they're interested in is like strength and this sort of camaraderie of men being with men and being strong together. Like there's this sense in which the Gorons are also just like these archetypal figures of the masculine archetype. And I wonder if maybe that's what Link is encountering again in this mountain. It could also make sense because a mountain is a place that grows closer to the sky and therefore is closer to the immaterial, or the non-material, the realm of things that don't actually exist in the real world, but that are the ideals or archetypes on which it is based, things that aren't actual real people. So yeah, I don't know. I found that interesting. Not sure what to make of it, but I feel there is something there. I'm intrigued by the way in which I think this game is much more about gender than I had anticipated. And the role that then Sheik would play in all this, or the way in which, right, it's like if the whole of the childhood arc has something to do with this, something to do with Link exploring relationship with woman, with what he considers to be the archetype of woman, or what a woman is, or something, or should be, or how a woman should behave, or something like that, then we move from childhood to adulthood, and the first thing that Link does when he reawakens in the world as an adult is he's face to face with Sheik, who is, again, according to this game, Princess Zelda, but behaving in the archetype of a man, behaving in the kind of behavior that would be that Link has learned to associate with men. Right? So it's like, okay, so I don't know, I think there's something interesting there of potentially something about an encounter with real people, right? The real people will behave in all sorts of different ways that are not tied to an archetype, you know. And maybe so there is something about that maybe Link's growing up into adulthood is his first encounter is a greeting with a person who doesn't fit the sort of binary gender behaviors that were explored in the first half of the game. But anyway, that's stuff I still want to think about. So yeah, let's leave that till later. And thank you. That's yeah. Goodbye. See you later.